How's it going, guys? Anxious Cynic back again with another Mine-imator tutorial. So as you may have seen not too long ago, I put out a Skywars fight animation, and the reason I made that animation is because some of you guys have been asking for how to do a fighting animation, and you specifically referenced Skywars, so I decided to try my hand at it so I could see what I could learn and pass on to you guys. So, little bit of a disclaimer, I am by no means the best fight animation guy. You know, there's a few other ones, other people who do Mine-imator tutorials that are really good at it, and that's kind of their thing, what they do. So I would not look at this tutorial or me as an authority on it, but if you want to get started, these are the basics that I learned. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. As you can see, I got my character here. We're going to go ahead and just start off with him. I didn't do my folder setup yet. If we need it later on, maybe I'll do it. But if you guys watch my previous tutorials, you should be aware of that and how all that works. But for now, let's go ahead and give him a sword. So we're going to go ahead and just use a diamond sword. Who cares? It doesn't matter. And we're just going to leave everything alone pretty much. I'm just moving it out of the way so I can adjust my rotation point. Now this may not really be that necessary, that big of a deal, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyway to get it out of the way because of reasons that we'll get into later if we need to. So I'm just going to go ahead and try to make it where the rotation point is going to be, let's just try to say like this point right here, if you can see that, where these two pixels collide. See if we can put it right about there. So I'm gonna say maybe that's about 6 and do 6 again and perfect. All right, so that's awesome. Anyway, this way, if we duplicate this and we want to, have him throw it or something, we'll go ahead and have our rotation point set up and we won't have to do anything or run into any problems later on. So I recommend doing that ahead of time. It's up to you, whatever you plan on doing with your animation. Anyway, so now we're gonna go ahead and parent him to our dang old human. As you see, I have these other scenes here, don't worry about those. Let's go ahead and do it to his right arm. And as you can see, it didn't do correctly because I had it moved. So we're going to zero out its position. Now we're going to do our rotation here. Let's go ahead and give that about -90. And we're going to straighten it out however he might be holding it. Let's go ahead and do that. Put it into position. Honestly, in my opinion, the swords or the items a lot of times in Mine-imator seem a little bit too big, so I'm going to actually scale it down. Now this is my choice. If you don't want to do it, then you can do it however you like. I just thought it looked a little better being a little smaller. He kind of has a Final Fantasy large oversized ness when you leave it at the normal size, so I bring it down to 0.8 and it looks a little more fitting to Steve's body size. You can obviously make it smaller or bigger depending on what you're trying to do, but that's me. So now that we got those basics covered, all we want to do is try to animate some fight motions. So if you watch my throwing tutorial, I kind of gave a little bit of information on how to arc the arm and stuff like that, but I didn't really go in depth. So you're gonna probably do similar things to that. So let's say if we want to have Steve bring his arm up, we're just going to go ahead and rotate on our x-axis. Now, one thing I'd like to note for you guys, I've kind of done this some time back, but just a refresher. In my settings, I have the Z is up ticked. If you don't have that ticked, then you're going to have your Y probably being your up and down. So mine is X, Y, and Z is my up and down rather than Y being so. I'm pretty sure that doesn't come on by default, but I use it because I think that's kind of a standard. So that's what I set mine to. So just keep in mind that yours might not be the same. All right, reminder over. Sorry about all the talkiness of this video. I just want to be thorough. Alright, so we're going to bend his arm a little bit, and then maybe bring it back a little. He's going to do a big swing here. Basically what we have is this set to on our very first frame. You may not want it set to the very first frame, but we're just going to start off with him kind of in a position ready to strike. And let's go ahead and zoom in on our timeline using the scroll wheel. And there's a few different ways we can do this. First of all, I'm just going to go to about frame 15. Let's see what that looks like. Bring his arm down, and I want to leave a little bit of a bend to it, maybe around 10. Let's have it go back just a tad, maybe about 15. So what we get here is basically he just does that. But what we can do, we can try some transitions to see if we can make that look a little better. So we're going to go down to our Keyframe Transitions. And we have this one here, which is kind of an ease out and back. And it kind of gives you that look you want with a motion like that. Like he does it and then he kind of has this bit of inertia that happens. So you can do that, and then depending on how far away the keyframe is, determines how quick it happens and as well as how much inertia seems to be depicted. So if I move it out further, it's a lot slower. So you can do that. Like that's one way to, that's an easy way to make it look a little realistic without having to go through too much work. So I use kind of a combination of that. Like it depends on what kind of swing I'm doing and whatnot. But another option you can have here, let's do an ease out, or an ease in actually. So it kind of starts slow, like he's really trying to bring it up. And let's bring this in. So it kind of looks like he's having to push his arm and get some of that momentum going. So that's kind of a little cool way to have the swing start. And then when it comes down like this, we can actually use this, and we want it to go back into a linear transition. So we're going to go to this one, and we're going to have it actually go back and forward using these linear transitions. So what we would do is instead of having it go from this position all the way to this back one, we're going to have it, let's say, go to about 5, right? And then we're going to bring this one over, which is our other position. Now, if you pay attention to what I'm doing with the keyframes here, I've just used the old position so that I could copy it over, and rather than having to reset it on this keyframe. It doesn't really matter how you do this, it's just, that's the way I just did it. I find it's a nice little shortcut, and we can play with the timing here. So let's say we want it to come to about 5, and then it eases back, and then comes back in. So let's go copy that one with Control C and then Control V to paste with that one highlighted. And as you can see there, that's pretty rough. What we could do, one way I've found to get this effect is you actually might want it to come to that farthest one and then back up, and then let's say maybe back to 10. So it depends on what numbers you're using and what kind of motion you want, but this is just a really basic guideline for how to kind of give a little bit more motion to the character. And also it depends on how far apart your keyframes are that determines how quick of a motion that is. You may notice here that 10 to 5 is quite a big jump. So if we bring it to 8, that gives us a little bit more of a realistic bounce there. Again, it depends on what kind of motion and inertia and momentum and all that stuff you want to portray. So that's one tip of like how to get a realistic motion on the character when he's doing a swing like this. So let's say instead of that though, let's say we want to have it come up and he's meeting another character's sword. So maybe we'll do like that. And maybe we want it to kind of curve in like this because they're right in front of him. So we would have it come like that. Do a little bit of rotation there, as you can see, if you can see that. So it comes in and it meets the other character's sword. And let's say when he meets that sword, it's going to kind of give a little bit. So once they hit, maybe it'll push in just a little bit more. That was that. We're going to use our rotation parameters up here. This is negative 28.22. So let's have it go negative 27.2, something like that. So you see it kind of gives it that little bit more of a sudden ugh. And then we could actually have this kind of, let's use a transition to see what this will look like. So you get a little bit more of a slowdown and it slightly goes over. We can bring this keyframe in to adjust that timing. Whatnot, you get that little, it's just not quite as just goes and stops. It gives it that little bit of a push there, a little bit of a something, you know, that little added oomph that you may want to it. So basically that's how you would accomplish just a basic swing and how to get some of this you know, more realistic, maybe not 100% realistic, but just more realistic stoppage and momentum and inertia to your character's movements. So basically what I did when I animated Skywars, the method I used, now I don't know if this is a method that, you know, the people who are regulars at this, who are good at it, what they do, but for me, I animated one character's movements and then the other character's reaction to those movements. So if I take this character, bring her over, let's go 180 degrees, and let's go ahead and copy the sword item from Steve. We're going to go ahead and duplicate that, and of course it duplicates it as parented to him, so we're going to take this one's parent and we're going to put it on Alex and her right arm as well. And there you go, like you get the rotation point and everything is perfectly copied over. It goes right to where we would want it to be on her as well, so that's convenient. You may have to adjust that depending on how things work out for you, but yeah, that worked out pretty well. All right, so at this point we want her, like he's coming down with that, so we want her to bring her sword up and be ready to block that mess that he's bringing to her. So what we're going to do is have the point where his is coming down here. We're going to use that as kind of a time frame for us. So we want her to bring her sword up and be ready to block. So we're going to go ahead and set 2 keyframes, one at the beginning where she's at this neutral position, stance, and then we're going to go ahead and take this one and rotate the arm a little bit like that. Maybe come up like this, bend the arm a bit. That's obviously you don't want her cutting her own face off, so we're going to go ahead and rotate that out just a tad and try to have her come over and be ready to stop that. Now obviously we may need to reposition him a bit, like how his is working. We also would probably want to animate the body, so when he goes to bring this in, he's probably going to be kind of coming forward just a bit. One of the things I did when I was doing the Skywars animation is I would bring his body forward, so let's just say about 8, and then I would kind of have it arc backwards a little bit to kind of give that sense that he's leaning into it, but, you know, trying to maintain a balance or something. So he's like that. We're also going to want to bring his head up. So here we go, something like that, so he's still looking at her. And what we may want is also a little bit of rotation on his body. So let's do like that maybe. Something, then maybe that's a bit too much. Let's try about 5. And then we're also going to have to turn his head a bit to try to make that match up. Let's go about -5. Now, that's like perfectly, you know, 5 on the body, -5 on the head, so that makes it perfectly straight. You may not always want it to be perfectly straight. You may want to add a little bit of variance to it. Let's go ahead and give his head a little bit of a tilt, maybe in the other direction. Something like that. Make it look like he's really trying to force it in there. And we're going to go ahead and take her body and have it tilt a little bit this way. Let's go about 5 on her as well. And we want her arm probably to rotate the other way. Let's see what this looks like. So we could have her, you know, rotate it like that, or we could bring it over more like this. So it depends on, you know, how exactly you are wanting the character to block, like what kind of movement they're supposed to be trying to do. So you go ahead and do like that. And the way the rotation points work in Mine-imator is kind of unfortunate. So you kind of have to finagle with some of it. See, at this point now, if we want her arm to bend down more towards that, we have to use our X rotation axis, something like that, and bring it over. And as you can see, we finally got the swords to meet. And yeah, she brings it up and blocks it real quick. So as you can see here, though, some of this isn't quite, you know, realistic the way we want. We may want her arm to bend a bit more or something. So I think this is pretty good, but sometimes when you're bringing it up, you may want to add like say around here, you may want to add a little bit more bend. Whatever it is, it makes it actually look a little more realistic and better. So she brings it up and then brings it out like that. Gives it a little bit more of a realistic vibe to the animation. She's kind of like bringing it up and then extending out at that last moment before their swords meet. And then of course his comes in a little bit, and we want to portray that slight reaction on her part. So on the second keyframe where his goes in, we're going to have hers go in a bit. Let's try about, this is 28.3, so we're going to do about 29.5 maybe. Something like that. And we have a keyframe on his, a transition. So we're going to go ahead and try to give this one the same one to make it seem like the reactions are happening similarly. So obviously this is really rough. This isn't like 100% the way you would want it to look in the end, but this is basically the techniques that I use in order to get the similar effects. So let's just go ahead, for the sake of being thorough, and match her body up as well. It's about her head, because her body tilts. -5. Something like that. And there he is. You know, he kind of catches it and moves it over. So to me, though, it's not really reacting quite as much as I would want it to. So let's go ahead and give him a little bit less bend here, maybe 42, and we'll give her a little bit more bend. Try 32. Is that too much? Yeah, she's starting to hit her own face again. That's not good. That's not how you win a sword fight, really. You probably don't want to wound yourself if at all possible. So let's see what that looks like. Let's back off, get a screen up. So as you can see there's a little bit of a reaction. You may want it to be a bigger, more exaggerated reaction, of course, but this is just, again, the basics of how you could accomplish that. So that's pretty much it for, you know, the basics of how to have the sword fight-ness. But you may recall in my Skywars, there we go, got the word out, animation, how I kind of had them moving with things. So let's say I want him to kind of be coming in closer to her with this. Now, this is something I might would have set up earlier on, but for the sake of how I'm doing this tutorial, we're just going to try to go step by step and see if we can make it work. Probably make myself look like an idiot. So we want him to kind of like step towards her with this. So let's go ahead and just have him have a keyframe there for his human body, or if you're using the folder technique, maybe you would use that. And we're just going to go ahead and take this in. And let's say we want him to step forward with his right leg. Something like that. So we'll just go ahead and give that a bend of 10. And as you can see, like his leg just comes up, not much happens there. So instead of actually bringing it forward, I want to kind of make this easier on myself. So I'm just going to bring him back for the beginning of the animation here instead of that-ness. So let's go ahead and bring him back, just say about -4. And he comes forward and that looks pretty terrible. So what we want to do is have the left leg bend backwards. Something like that. There we go. So as you can see, he kind of comes forward. Yeah! Something like that. And this actually kind of goes a little bit too slow for me. So maybe I would want to have him kind of, where's the transition? Let me bring this out. Another thing, this little tip for you guys, is you can extend these windows or bring them in and get different results on how this kind of stuff shows up. I didn't do it right there, but you get the idea. All right, so let's use that one. So he kind of comes forward and a little bit quicker and comes to us a little bit gradual stop there. So let's go ahead and apply that same keyframe transition to our legs, and we get a little bit more realistic. Once again, you can play with these keyframes and see what works for you, what kind of movements you guys want for your own, but I think that's not too bad. Another thing I would do here with his head is comes forward maybe when he first clings with her a little bit, so he's gonna have to go, let's say about -3. Maybe that's not quite as enough there. Maybe about that. Just zero it out. You can see how that kind of happens there. So let's go ahead and extend these out and make it look a little more obvious. See there? Kind of gives it a little bit more realistic motion. Let's also give this, let's see if we can give it a keyframe transition to make it look a little better. Not too bad. What if we bring these back a bit? And let's bring that up like that. There we go. That's maybe not perfect, but you get the idea. You kind of want to make it have a little bit of motion, give a little bit of movement and life to the impacts that they're having on each other. Same with the body here. We may want to bring it up. Let's just say, let's do about 9.5. And then we'll also bring this to about -4.5. Something like that. And let's try to apply a similar transition here to give them all similar effects. Now the body, as you may notice what I'm doing with the body here is I'm bending the body forward or I'm tilting it forward and bending it backwards. So you get a much more subtle effect on how all this is reacting to each other. Whereas let's just say if I left this at -3, then it should be a little bit more obvious. It's still subtle because we don't want it too exaggerated depending on what kind of movement you're doing. But yeah, you could get that and have that happen. So he just comes at her and they clang. And just real quick, I'm going to go ahead and try to do similarly and have her react by going backwards. And I'll be right back. Alright guys, I'm back and now we have this little animation set up here. I added a little bit more oomph to the tack here where Steve comes in and he goes forward a little bit more and she goes back a little bit. So what you get is this little bit more realistic reaction here as soon as he hits her, and she goes back a little bit reacting to that force. And basically the way I accomplished this, I animated her to go back a bit more, like once the sword hits. So you may notice from the beginning, she steps forward, he steps forward, her sword comes up to block, his hits, and then she goes back and is kind of put back on her heels a little bit in order to absorb the force of his attack, right? And then as you can see, I animated his arm to move a bit as though he's really grinding it into her sword, trying to push, and you get that little effect there. Now again, this could be refined tremendously. This is just the basics of the movement here. And what I did here is I wanted to give her head a little bit more of a reaction. So instead of just being a normal transition, maybe we'll try this one. And this is pretty subtle of a movement here on the head, so you may not really see it a whole lot. But again, you could do the same thing that we did with the other ones using linear transitions or what have you to give her head a little bit more of a bounce back, for instance. So just real quick, we'll go ahead and try to toss that in there. Let's have it bounce back to say 3.5. Something like that. And let's give it this transition here. And it doesn't look that great, but you get the idea. You could do that and kind of give a little bit of a bounce, some realistic movement. Maybe we'll bring it up to 4 so it's not quite as much. Anyway, you just don't want it to go to one spot and stop. A lot of times things kind of move and jolt and vibrate, so you want to mimic that, especially with a movement like this where there's supposed to be a lot of force going into it. And as you can see, Steve, his head probably shouldn't be moving that way. Let's try giving him this ease in and ease out. It's a little bit better. Maybe drag that keyframe out. Yeah, that's too far. That is way too far. There we go. And let's see here. This comes back to, all right, as you can see here, one of the things we're having is his head comes back to 11.3. Let's just make that 11 for the sake of it. And at this point, it's like straight on. So you get a pretty big difference there. So if we raise this up, let's just say to 5, then you get a little bit better reaction there. So you want to keep in mind your numbers of your rotation or your position points, and try to make them not too far apart when you have short movements like this, because you'll get that really exaggerated movement that doesn't look that good. So it's definitely a fine balance between subtle movements and exaggerated movements, and you got to try to exercise some rationality, some logic when it comes to how those things play out. Now obviously here her arm could be animated some more and things like that, but that's the basics of how you would try to animate something like that happening. That doesn't look too bad for a really rough and basic movement there. Anyway, this tutorial took way too long. I'm sorry for the length, but I hope you guys got something out of it and learned something. And this is probably going to be a little bit of a series, at least 2 parts. I'm not really sure. But come back next time and we will try to do some cool blood effects and things. All right, so I hope you guys learned something. I hope it was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to hit that like button, comment, and subscribe. Share it with your friends and your family and your pets. And I will see you guys in the next video.